10. Paddleboarder vs. Florida gator. Vicki Remy Baker was enjoying a peaceful day paddleboarding at Silver Springs State Park in Central Florida in 2021 when a large alligator came out of nowhere and lunged straight at her. Viral footage of the shocking encounter shows the 60-year-old trying to push the reptile away with her paddle before frantically trying to paddle away. She screamed at the creature to get away as it continued to follow her. A man off camera can be heard advising Baker to back up and that she had made the alligator even angrier by hitting it with a paddle. Thankfully, Vicki escaped physically unharmed, but she was left feeling bothered by how the alligator had pursued her so ambitiously, something she had never experienced in her many years of paddleboarding. Florida's alligator population is estimated at 1 gator for every 15 people, but attacks are incredibly rare. Experts estimate the likelihood of an unprovoked violent encounter at around 1 in 3.2 million. At the same time, alligator attacks on people are admittedly on the rise in the Sunshine State due to its rapidly increasing human population. 9. Capsized crew. In November 2022, the 4-person crew of a 40-foot, 12.2 meters pleasure yacht called the Smouse heard and felt their boat shaking. They were sailing 14 miles, 22.5 kilometers, off the Portuguese coast when the strange movement began. After hearing a loud noise coming from the back of the yacht, they realized that they were surrounded by killer whales. As the orcas attacked the boat, it started to crack under the force of their jaws. The whales eventually ripped a large hole in the weakened hull, causing it to quickly take on water. Realizing they had no other choice, the crew sent out a distress call and boarded a lifeboat. They were rescued unharmed by a Swedish boat in the area. One of the crew members, Augustin, told the Portugal resident that the sailors initially thought the whales would frolic around the boat for a few minutes and then go away, which was why they didn't radio for help right away. They expected the damage to be much less severe than it was. The incident occurred amid a spike in encounters between orcas and humans near Portugal. Just a month earlier, 2 other boats were sunk by killer whales. In one instance, the whales rammed into a boat repeatedly, giving its crew the impression that the attack was coordinated. The reasons for the increased confrontations were unclear to scientists, who speculated that the whales might like the motion of the water produced by a boat's propeller, causing them to get angry and attack the propeller when they notice that it's not in motion. 8. John Martin III. In 2018, an eccentric American homeless activist named John Martin III left Anchorage in an 8-foot, 2.4 meters dinghy in hopes of reaching China and reuniting with his wife and son, whom he hadn't seen in over a decade. The 45-year-old adventurer had a small amount of food, a compass, and little else. 11 days into his journey, he encountered rough conditions, something that the Bering Sea is known for, leaving him with no choice but to drift aimlessly and go wherever the sea took him. 2 weeks after his departure, Martin washed up on a Siberian beach. He didn't know it at the time, but he was on the Chukotka Peninsula in Russia's Far East. It was amazing that he made it that far. The U.S. Coast Guard was reportedly shocked that Martin survived some of the world's most treacherous waters in a boat so small that it looked like he could barely fit in it. He had no passport, money, or documents with him. After being fed and given dry clothes by a family that lived in a rural settlement nearby, he was arrested for entering the country without proper documents and taken into custody. Martin spent more than 3 months in a hospital before the charge was dropped. He was released into the region's capital, Anadyr, where he wandered and lived on the streets until a family took him in. The Russian government finally deported Martin 6 months after he appeared on the coast. 7. Danny McDaniel and John Chambers. Danny McDaniel was kayaking off the California coast one morning in 2019 when he felt something push his boat. He mentioned it to his friend nearby, John Chambers, who looked over and saw McDaniel's kayak rocking at first, then making more drastic movements. Out of nowhere, a massive great white shark breached the water's surface. The deadly apex predator, estimated to be around 19 feet (5.8 meters) long, clamped its jaw down on McDaniel's kayak. He later told ABC News that he told himself not to fall into the water under any circumstances, while also feeling bewildered by the shark's gargantuan size. Chambers initially yelled at McDaniel to hit the great white, but also found himself frozen in shock at its sheer size. After biting the kayak for a few seconds, the shark let go. Moments later, it vanished, much to the relief of the kayakers. When they arrived back on shore, they examined McDaniel's boat and found bite marks, scratches, and 2 shark's teeth embedded in it. McDaniel said he was grateful to emerge from the encounter unscathed and described the damage to his boat as evidence that the shark took a nibble rather than a full bite. As terrifying as the incident was, both men said that they wouldn't let it stop them from going back out on the water. 6. Frightened Florida fishermen. While fishing off the Key West one day in 2017, a group of anglers encountered far more than they bargained for, in the form of a huge bull shark that nearly tipped over their canoes. It started when one of the fishermen felt something tug on his line. With some help from his friends, he tried to reel in his catch. Suddenly, a bull shark lunged out of the water, nearly tipping the group's 2 canoes over. It tried to attack a second time, but managed to free itself from the man's fishing line and swam away. One of the fishermen posted the footage online, writing that the incident showed him and his friends just how ferocious bull sharks can be. He added that sharks typically don't attack unprovoked, and that everyone involved in the incident was thankful that nobody was hurt. Violent encounters between bull sharks and humans are more common than they are with most other shark species, with an average of 69 unprovoked attacks every year. Viewers were shocked by the close encounter, with one commenter writing that the group didn't just need a bigger boat, they needed a real boat in the first place. 5. Hendrick Hodsi. During a whitewater rafting trip in the Congo in 2010, American tourists Ben Stooksbury and Chris Korbulik looked on in horror as a crocodile attacked their guide. They were paddling alongside 35-year-old Hendrick Hodsi when a massive crocodile suddenly emerged and overturned his kayak. The raging reptile pulled Hodsi underwater before he even had an opportunity to cry out for help. He never surfaced, and his body was never recovered. Stooksbury and Korbulik managed to swim to land and were luckily unharmed. And while the experience was undoubtedly traumatic, neither of them ruled out the possibility of someday returning to Africa to kayak. Speaking to the Today Show, Stooksbury said that the trio were navigating a little-known tributary of the Congo River known as the Lukuga River when the incident occurred. They were paddling close together to hopefully fool any nearby predators that they were one large animal. But it clearly failed to deter the crocodile that killed Hodsi. And once a person is in a crocodile's grasp, the outlook immediately becomes grim. In the words of wildlife expert Ron McGill, there's no human being that stands a chance against that type of animal. 4. Terror in the Gulf Coast. While out fishing on a 24-foot, 7.3 meters motorboat in the Gulf Coast one day in 2022, 3 fishermen were suddenly overwhelmed by powerful waves. The vessel was tied to an oil rig about 25 miles, 40 kilometers off the Louisiana coast, when it flooded and began to sink rapidly. Left with no other choice, the men put on their life vests and hoped for the best. Within minutes, the boat sank, leaving the 3 men at the mercy of the unforgiving waters around them. As they clung to coolers in their efforts to stay afloat, they were swept further out to sea by strong winds, while fish and other creatures repeatedly bit at them. Speaking with People magazine, Lay, one of the men, described the sensation as like a bunch of hypodermic needles just sticking at one time. The men tried dialing 911, but couldn't get a signal on their phones. They became increasingly cold and exhausted as night fell, and they continued to drift further out, combating the waves to no avail. Finally, during the early morning hours before sunrise, the stranded fishermen saw a Coast Guard helicopter above. Lay blinked his phone as an SOS, but failed to capture the chopper's attention. They saw a shrimping boat a few hours later and tried to swim to it, but couldn't fight the current or the wind. Realizing that this might be their only chance to get rescued, Lay took off swimming toward the vessel alone while his friends waited. In the meantime, they were attacked by a shark and fought the creature off by jabbing it in the eyes. During his solo swim, Lay's phone suddenly got a signal, enabling him to send a text to a friend right before the device died. The friend contacted Lay's fiancée, who called the Coast Guard. Finally, after 28 hours, their harrowing ordeal was over. While the men were completely exhausted, they miraculously survived without any serious injuries. 3. Jeremy Worthy. 43-year-old Jeremy Worthy was kayaking off the southern coast of New South Wales, Australia one morning in 2020 when he encountered much bigger swells and stronger currents than he expected. In a social media post, he said he got swamped when he initially headed out, but that it seemed like the waters were calmer past the shore waves. Less than an hour after departing from the shore, Worthy was exhausted, overwhelmed, and unable to get back to dry land. In a desperate attempt to attract help, he posted his location on Facebook along with a video of himself trying to paddle against the tide. Nobody called emergency services until 9 minutes after Worthy posted the footage, when a beachgoer found his empty kayak washed up on the shore. His lifeless body was found floating in the water. After receiving the tragic news, Worthy's friends and loved ones left an array of comments on the video, with several people apologizing for not realizing the seriousness of the situation and calling for help. Hopefully, the story serves as a sobering lesson to err on the safe side and contact authorities if someone seems like they might be in need. 2. Shark joins fishing crew. Captain Ryan Churches was hosting a chartered fishing trip off the New Zealand coast in 2022 when a short-fin mako shark took one of the angler's bait. With the ability to swim at speeds of up to 46 miles per hour, 74 kilometers per hour, the species is the world's fastest shark. Churches cautioned his customers to be prepared to get out of the way fast, in case the nearly 9-foot-long, 2.7 meters, 330-pound, 150-kilogram shark jumped up onto the boat. Just seconds later, that's exactly what happened. Viral footage of the incident shows the angler wrestling with his line in what initially appears to be a typical fishing scenario. That all changed on less than a moment's notice, when the shark landed itself on the bow of the boat. Throughout the rest of the video, it can be seen sitting motionless with its mouth wide open. The shark struggled to free itself from the bow, at one point causing Churches to worry that he and the crew might have to intervene to free it. As an experienced fisherman, he knew that approaching the creature would probably be met with an aggressive reaction, which was particularly concerning given its mouthful of razor-sharp teeth. Luckily, the shark managed to free itself and swam away uninjured. While short-fin makos are known to occasionally jump onto boats, it's not exactly a common occurrence. It was most likely a once-in-a-lifetime experience for the boat's guests, who were extremely thankful that the shark didn't land near them in the back of the boat. 1. Sarah Feeney and Ellen Glynn. During what was meant to be a short paddleboarding trip off Ireland's Galway coast in 2020, cousins Sarah Feeney and Ellen Glynn were swept out to sea by a sudden shifting breeze. They had left their phones behind and had no way to call for help. The young women tied their paddleboards together and clung to each other while they waited for rescue that they could only hope would come. Their hope dwindled throughout the night as they encountered large waves, lightning, and cold temperatures. 15 hours after departing for their evening outing, Feeney and Glynn were finally spotted by a commercial fisherman and his son. They were clinging to some crab pot buoys nearly 2 miles, 3.2 kilometers from the nearest land, and more than 20 miles, 32.2 kilometers, from their original starting point. Speaking with national press agency RTE, Feeney said that by then she and Glynn were cold, weak, shaky, and trying not to fall asleep because they feared they might not wake up. Luckily, both of them came out of the ordeal physically uninjured. The psychological effects were lasting, but the women were grateful to survive and focused on moving forward. Thanks for watching. Would you rather survive 10 hours lost at sea at nighttime on a kayak, or spend 2 days hopelessly lost deep in a remote forest before being rescued? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.